The Rise of Skywalker left fans with a few unanswered questions, like what did Finn want to tell Rey? Is Janna Lando's child? But most importantly, how did Palpatine return? Well, it turns out that Lucasfilm has been seeding answers to that question for years. I've got answers here on Screen Crush. In Rise of Skywalker, they kind of wave away an explanation for Palpatine's return by showing you a few clone bodies and repeating a line from Revenge of the Sith.
The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural.
But let's go into a little more detail than that. Now, for my money, this is the best scene in Revenge of the Sith, maybe in the whole prequel trilogy. It's when Palpatine carefully lays out his final lure to turn Anakin to the dark side by telling him the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. He claims that a Sith Lord obtained mastery over life itself, that he could both create life and...
he could even keep the ones he cared about from dying.
Palpatine strongly implies that he was Plagueis' apprentice. He's just itching to go full Colonel Jessup and brag about it. So it's also likely that he learned how to cheat death from his master. In the original trilogy, all of the dead Jedi come back as Force ghosts. So for 16 years, we fans just assumed that that's what Jedi did. But then Qui-Gon didn't fade away. Why was that? Well, there are two kinds of the Force. Yes, there is the dark side and the light side, but within them, there is the cosmic Force and the living Force. Qui-Gon mentions this in The Phantom Menace.
But not at the expense of the moment. Be mindful of the living Force, young Padawan.
Essentially, the cosmic Force is like the voice of God, seeing the future, understanding the will of the Force. But Qui-Gon was more concerned with the living Force that's generated by all living things. By studying this living Force, he learned how to tie his essence to the real world. Through meditation, he passed this knowledge on to Yoda, who passed it on to Obi-Wan.
Your old master, Qui-Gon. How to commune with him, I will teach you.
So it makes sense that Palpatine would have found a way to preserve his essence as well. There's also history in Star Wars of places and things being strongly connected to the dark side. The caves on Dagobah in Act 2, for example. But also, the lava planet of Mustafar is very strong with the dark side. Now, this was a headquarters for the Separatists in the Clone Wars, and it's even where Palpatine was keeping Force-sensitive babies that he had kidnapped. But mostly you remember it as the birthplace of Darth Vader. During his battle with Obi-Wan, the dark side power of the planet flowed through Anakin, making him even stronger and more arrogant than ever before.
You underestimate my power!
This is in part why his rage overwhelmed him so much that he tried to kill his wife. After Revenge of the Sith, in the comics, Darth Vader commissioned a castle to be built on Mustafar. We saw this castle in Rogue One, but it wasn't just a fancy crib, it was built specifically to focus the dark side of the Force so he could communicate with the dead. And it worked. Vader traveled through the realm of the dead and found Padme, who rejected him. But there's another important part of this story. Palpatine had just given Vader the mask of Mo-Men. This was a Sith who died 1,000 years ago, but his essence was still tied to this mask. Before Vader entered the realm of the dead, Mo-Men's mask possessed various people and actually controlled them from beyond the grave. Then he entered the dark side portal and reformed his old body. Now, Vader killed him in a duel, but this shows that 1, a Sith can tie their essence to an object, and 2, entering a place strong with the dark side of the Force can focus your essence into a physical form, kind of like in Lord of the Rings. Sauron was only able to be an eye in Mordor, but if he got back his ring, the object of his power, he could focus his energy and remake a body.
I can see him with my waking eyes.
And we also see lots of cloning tech in Rise of Skywalker. Now, of course, Palpatine controls a clone army in the Clone Wars, and we see other clones in this movie. But in another Darth Vader comic, Vader fights an Imperial scientist named Silo. This cyborg had developed the technology to transfer his consciousness into clone bodies after death, similar to the Cylons in Battlestar Galactica. So Palpatine would have had access to this tech as well. But most of the groundwork for Palpatine's resurrection comes from Chuck Wendig's novels The Aftermath trilogy, which are set right after Return of the Jedi. The Emperor's death kickstarted a plan called the Contingency. Now, part of this was Operation Cinder, where the Empire basically torched its own planets. This is detailed in the video game Battlefront 2. But basically, if the Empire wasn't strong enough to defend its Emperor, then it's not worth existing. Palpatine had raised a young man named Gallius Rax to carry out the contingency. In the years following the Emperor's death, Rax orchestrated the final downfall of the Empire from the inside, including their final defeat on planet Jakku. Now, Jakku was the Empire's last stand, but that's exactly how the Emperor planned it. He wanted to lure the rebels and Imperial forces to the planet and detonate a bomb that would destroy the planet and kill them all. But an Imperial officer named Ray Sloan stopped that from happening. But part of the Emperor's plan was carried out. Rax had built an enormous observatory on Jakku that charted the unknown regions of the galaxy. This area had never been charted before because, as we saw in Rise of Skywalker, it's incredibly difficult to navigate. And by the way, Grand Admiral Thrawn from Star Wars Rebels is also from this region of the galaxy.
And pull the rebels apart piece by piece. They'll be the architects of their own destruction.
And as we saw in Rise of Skywalker, this is the part of space where Exo Gul is located. Exo Gul is even stronger with the dark side of the Force than Mustafar. So Palpatine's plan was for the most loyal Imperials, the very best, to go to the unknown regions and rebuild. And this is where the First Order began. But there was a more mystical angle to Palpatine's plan. One of the villains in Aftermath is named Yub Tashu, who's basically a Sith fanboy who can't use the Force. He says Palpatine lives on. We will find him again out there in the dark. Everything has arranged itself as our master foretold. All things move toward the grand design. The sacrifices have all been made. And then he adds, we can find Palpatine and revivify him, bringing his soul back to flesh anew. At the end of the Aftermath trilogy, he was attempting some sort of dark side ritual, but was killed before completing it. I think this ritual would have focused Palpatine's essence into some form or object. But since the ritual was stopped, his return took decades longer than he planned. We see this in Rise of Skywalker. His life force is so weakened that he actually requires a host body, Rey, to come back to life. When he steals the living force from Rey and Ben, he's able to fully configure his form. So that's how Palpatine returned.
Good.
Should more of that have been in the movie? Let me know what you think down in the comments below. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy.